Hello everybody, my name is Danotage, and today we're going to be taking a look at the service impact of the recent RMT changes in Escape from Tarkov. I polled you all on how you feel about them, so we'll go over that, as well as cover the things that lead up to why these changes even got made in the first place. Before I get into this, just know that I'm not going to fully be defending either side. It's just difficult to develop games with early access and huge spikes in popularity, so even though developers do a pretty bad job at making decisions based on what they've observed from their community, some had a plan from before the game was even released to the public, or even pivot. They think that said pivot is based on what they've observed from the player base. This goes for many different game companies. I'm not talking about BSG here, talking about things in general. It's very difficult to figure out why players do certain things. In the era of memes, whether or not players are doing things just because they think it's the best way to play the game, or because they think it's funny. Then you have to make decisions based on the raw data and the testimony of a handful of people. This becomes a big contention because on one hand, you are the people that the developers are usually asking about their game. Who are these people? Normally, the answer to that question is the influencer community. Why? Because influencers are easy to contact and trust based on the fact that you can get to know an influencer through their content. It's the entire reason that audiences watch influencers in the first place. Some creators are easy to talk to than others, and some are better at articulating their ideas. But the strategy is that if you can understand who you're talking to and where they're coming from, you kind of get an idea of what their community is like. You can get an even better idea on what their entire section of that player base also wants. It's meant to be a force multiplier. The reason it's important to mention this is because it's very easy to blame content creators and developers for listening to them, for why it is that things appear that you're having a bad time in your favorite game. The truth be told, we are some of the reasons that bad decisions get made, or at least decisions that don't hit in the way they were intended. It's also important to understand that just going out into the general population of a game's player base comes back with ridiculous feedback, or seeing most of the time that you're spent reading comments is just fix this. It's not very helpful. So, while your emotions are completely valid, and even though it is completely okay to be upset by a change when it happens, and when things were going just fine by your standards, it is also important to remember that it's impossible to always get things right, and every change that is made is made with the hypothesis that it will be a net positive for the entire community in the end. I'm sure you all know this, but here's to hoping it helps that simply do not understand how difficult things might be when developing a game for a mass amount of people. So, most of you that are tuning in probably already know what RMT stands for, but for those that don't, it stands for real money trading. It's very broad, it's very basic, but that's what it is. And in a game like Escape from Tarkov, it has become a very popular form of cheating. This is mostly due to how difficult the game is and how frustrating it is to lose over and over again without getting a win. For a lot of us, it is kind of the reason we keep playing. But for the rest, it is either a reason to stop playing or pay someone to give you stuff. And while the number of cheaters is relatively low compared to legitimate players in that ratio, seeing one cheater every handful of raids is enough to really make you notice and have it stick in your mind in a very negative way. I also want to point out that not all cheaters do it for the purpose of RMT. Some do it because they like cheating in order to be perceived as better at the game than everyone else. But in a game like Tarkov, where loot seems to be more important to players than dominating other players through first-person shooter skill, and the likelihood of a cheater using their cheats for the purpose of monetary gain is far higher than the alternate. So, what makes RMT such a popular method of cheating? Probably because in a player's mind, they're not the ones cheating. They're spending their hard-earned cash to get gear they either don't have the time to gain themselves or even the time to gain the skill that would earn them this gear naturally. This is important because we have to remember that most of what makes someone good at Tarkov is the knowledge one has on the game. And in order to gain such knowledge, it usually takes a few hundred fairly regular hours of play. Meaning 300 hours spent over the last 5 years since this game was released to the public at all, and maybe only on weekends, won't get you remotely as far as someone who put the same amount of time invested in a span of like 2 or 3 months. It also helps to remember that the culture of pay to keep up with or even ahead of the rest of the community is it's a very largely popular model among the current era of developer-sanctioned gaming. Why? Well, because as we can see, it makes a lot of companies a lot of money. You and I can sit here and talk about whether buying your way forward is a good or bad idea, or whether it's moral or immoral, but in certain games, it exists first party, and that's the objective truth. The further objective truth is that it does exist, and the amount of people that participate in this model is large enough that it has completely influenced the gaming sphere as a whole. It is the entire reason that free-to-play games continue to be released on a nearly weekly basis, it seems. I see them, quite frankly, all the time. Alright, so what are RMTs? What are the RMTs that exist in Tarkov in its current state? Well, there are dozens of not secret at all websites that are built for players to buy and sell in-game items. And as long as players can drop the items and raid for each other, they are just able to list it on a market and the two players can agree on the trade. Then they can get creative on how they actually want to give each other these items through in-game somehow, whatever way it might be. Usually it's just dropping the item, but as we are about to see, things will change for that reason. Things have changed, in fact. Then there are sites that allow players to pay people to take them in raid and just feed them everything the person finds in this as a service for in that raid. So somebody will go in and somebody they paid, and they'll just sit there and wait for that cheater to go around and grab all the stuff and feed it right to them. There's a bunch of videos on this that go over why these people do it, why cheaters do it, and the actual method that they use, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the impact in what it means to the everyday player or the legitimate player like you and myself, and what we've seen based on the changes that BSG is doing right now. For those familiar with Craigslist, it's just like that. It's just like Craigslist, with what seems to be roughly the same risk. You can get scammed. You can have something just go wrong within a raid, and on both sides, you're dealing with a little bit of risk. Obviously, none of these services are sanctioned by Battlestate, but considering there are no laws being broken other than the extremely well-known unwritten rule of gaming that cheating is bad, BSG can't do anything about the existence of these sites. And this is officially considered cheating. So whether you're using software to affect your game or not, this is still the same level of bannable offense. Obviously, the level of cheaters in any competitive game affects the happiness of their player base, and happiness usually corresponds directly to whether or not a player decides to play the game any given day or week or month. So when a company running a game that depends on a huge amount, not maybe a huge amount, but enough players to keep things going and feel alive at any given time, especially during the slower times near the end of a wipe, and sees a big ratio. We see this bigger ratio of cheaters to legitimate players that's far more noticeable. They have to do something about it. That causes players to make these decisions that directly affect the cheating population. Now that we see what the devs are up against, what are the changes that have been made thus far and how are they affecting both sides of this conversation? Because they are affecting both sides of this conversation. It's the whole reason that I'm sitting here talking to you about this in the first place. One of the first things BSG did was change when players could get access to the flea market, the player-to-player in-game trading market, not to be confused with RMT transactions as, real money stuff in the outside world. This was a direct response to the bot accounts that were buying and selling items at a profit to feed accounts direct injections of in-game cash. most people will sit here and tell you that that's not a big deal. You can just get around bots, what have you. But if enough people feed them, that's what causes all this cash to flow to one account. And then that person can then sell all that money for real money trading, RMT. And this method has been, I mean, it's old. It's been around since MMOs were basically first created. I'm sure you see them in every current MMO today, in today's date. But if you played World of Warcraft, you've seen it there. Pretty much anything you can think of, this has been in existence. The change of the minimum level requirement to unlock the flea market was about 2 years ago and was followed up by the little check mark that we see every item that we find in raid. In turn, the only items that can be traded on said flea market. This is another response to bots on the market and an attempt to force all items traded on the flea market to be gained by actual humans playing the game. This was a change that disappointed a lot of players that liked playing the game more like a stock market than a military shooter, which stinks, but it was highly effective at deterring bots from farming money from players. But again, that's a surface change that I think affected a lot of people. However, forcing RMTers to get more creative, this seemed to have spawned a lot more noticeable in-raid cheaters, because it was the only way to get items worth enough to make money that they can sell on their own market. And restrictions were made to loot tables that, not allowing most cases to be found in raid at all. This meant only could you not take them into raid from your stash, but they couldn't be found in raid anymore, you know, except for smaller things like documents cases and the rare ammo case. But those are extremely rare, and even when you find them, they're not nearly as satisfying as walking into a marked room and finding an entire weapons case that was worth a couple million rubles on the flea market. Or even more to people running standard accounts, and having that weapons case meant that their extremely valuable real estate was just cleared up a bit. This put a real damper on any excitement of unlocking a marked room. It's very easy to, at that point, get very jaded about the fact that BSG was doing this on purpose to push sales to the higher tier packages for the game. And while that still may be true, we have to look at this in the sense of there's a very hard balance and a reason that these were made, and it was mostly to get rid of and combat real money trading and cheaters. So now we're really seeing the real global effect to pretty much everyone that played the game. Not to diminish the effects from previous changes, but this was a change that was made with a sense to deter cheaters, was still something that killed a lot of fun for almost literally everyone. And this brings us to the most current state of the response to RMTers and how it affects the community, but also how it may help in a big way. So, how it may help players, I should say. I should clarify that. How it may help legitimate players. We'll get to that in a second. So, as we know, this video is around the time that the current player base is expecting the game to wipe real soon. By the time this comes out, probably a couple weeks. Very soon. This is something that is important as timing because, well, we'll get to that in a second. So, the changes that were made could just mean that it can affect the next wipe in a semi-positive way. It really could. And as I'm about to discuss, also in a negative way. So, the most recent changes includes the blocking of dropping items found in raid, such as money above 20k rubles, all barter items except gold chains with a limit of 3, kite powder, gunpowder with a limit of 3, 2 tool sets, 1 roller wristwatch, 1 paracord, 1 silicon tube, and 1 injector of each type. Then you also cannot drop any keys or key cards, any containers, specific armbands, info items, or some of the more expensive melee items. Quite frankly, most of them. If you try to drop them inside a raid, they will simply just disappear. Yeah, this is definitely a list that was alarming to a lot of players. Look through Twitter DMs and the forums and Reddit and all that stuff. That's pretty much all people talked about for a good month. I even put up a poll on YouTube a couple weeks ago with, we got about 240 votes. That's a pretty good amount. 56% of you said that it does not affect you at all, and only 12% say it truly annoys you. I'll run the same poll when the wipe happens. Give it a week or so. So stay tuned to that. Because I feel that there will, like, a lot of these people that have voted in the 56% where it says doesn't affect you at all, will feel something. You may still be in the same camp, and I do believe, I would say most of you are still in the same camp, but you will feel it a little bit more than you did probably about now. And I tried to poll people that were constantly playing still today. Obviously, we would have got a lot more votes for those speculating, but that's not what I was looking for. It's clear that a lot of you are not fazed by this, or you just enjoy watching cheaters get responded to, which is fair because I like seeing that too. But I hope that's not why you voted in the way that you did, because there's something true and scientific to be seen here. But I totally understand if that's what you did. That totally makes sense. But again, we'll throw this vote out about a couple weeks after the wipe happens. The arguments for why these changes shouldn't affect people is because BSG wants to promote players escorting their friends to quest locations where the keys are needed. That's why you can't drop any keys. They want friends to say, hey, come with me. I'll take you to this key and open it for you, and then you get the quest done, what have you. And this technically brings a lot of players that tend to be in groups down to a level that is to those that are normally playing solo. Meaning, if you have to go with your friend to open a door, you're going to be kind of hindered in the same way that somebody solo would need to be in order to find that key to do it themselves. But I do hope that this means that key spawn rates are increased, because if any of my hardcore videos have shown anything, is that some keys just feel impossible to find, and sometimes you just need your friend who can't play with you all the time to just drop you a key because, well, they don't need it anymore. I will say that the biggest problem I see with this level of change is that it only deters a portion of RMTers that trade via a market. This doesn't do anything for those that walk around through raids, sucking up all the loot through using their cheats and whatnot. However, the reason for this is because it is far more difficult to detect market traders, as there's no software being used. They are not physically cheating. They are doing things that is essentially unethical. There's no way to detect that somebody is cheating unless you're watching videos and then recording voice lines. It's very difficult. So there's a reason why this change was made. Again, not defending either side heavily, but there is a reason for all this, and it makes sense, at least at some fashion. I hope this does strike a big blow, and I hope it becomes a big positive from this change. And that hopefully the loot tables for marked rooms and whatnot go back to where they were before. I have my doubts, because like I said, it hasn't really been that much deterrent towards raid carry RMTers, but it should stop loot collectors, at least a little bit. And that pretty much catches everyone up. Battlestate Games has been attempting to combat the cheating community for a very long time now, despite what many will have you believe. There are some of the changes to game mechanics that directly affect the players, and as I said before, their goal is always to have a net positive. However, it is easy to feel like some changes are made for the sole purpose of combating cheaters, despite how negatively it affects legitimate players. I know, I feel that way sometimes, I really do. And to be fully honest, I started putting this video together with the purpose of talking about how harsh some of these changes were made for the main community. And I still feel like a lot of devs spend a little bit too much time fighting this war without the thought of how it will negatively affect people who are just trying to enjoy themselves. But after seeing how many toxic individuals are out there just spamming these devs with some pretty hateful stuff about how much they hated seeing a cheater, I felt the need to refocus this video. Don't get me wrong, I wish these changes weren't made, and I will probably feel quite frustrated when I truly experience the pains at the wipe. But it is hard not to sympathize with BSG. So, again, be nice and give criticism in the most constructive form you possibly can. It will prove to be the best way to benefit you as a player in any future of this game. In any game, really. Including this one right here that we all dearly love. So with that, I send you all back into the world to get more scavs and hug your best boy Gluhar. Stay safe, like the video, and I'll see you all next time.